So we're now at the 35th day of the war. Um, and today looks like a problematic day at the very least. The situation in the north today has been particularly troubling. Um, the chances of involvement at this point of Hezbollah, I would say, has gone up. I wouldn't say it's definite, but Nasrallah seems to be willing to take the risk, which he wasn't until now. We had two big incidents that changed a little bit, changed the calculus. Number one, there was the shooting of a anti-tank missile at the electric company vehicle, in which one person was killed, four of the other electric workers were seriously wounded, and one person on the moshav, which was Dolev, was also seriously wounded. So this is one scale up. It wasn't soldiers. I mean, he has before. We hit a water truck a couple of weeks ago, but this was a one step up. But beyond that, there was a firing of rockets, quote unquote, by Hamas, which is meaningless, that went a little bit further than he's fired before, to the Akrayot, which is the area that's between Haifa and Akko. And so that's one step further, which he hasn't gone. Didn't fire on Haifa, but he fired on the area leading up to it. There have been individual missiles fired in that direction, but this was the first time there was a full-fledged barrage in that direction. So he's testing. He's testing us. Let's put it that way. Also, 2 days ago, he successfully attacked the IDF positions and killed a soldier using a drone, using the same drones that were basically used, the Iranian drones that the Russians are using in Ukraine. So that's troubling also. It's a little bit troubling that the drones have gotten through. I'm not sure we have the same equipment that Elbit sells the world, which is an anti-drone system that's supposed to basically deal with all drones. But I have a feeling, knowing the Air Force as I do, they didn't buy it because it wasn't part of their plan. But that's just a supposition. I don't know that for a fact. So the reality is the drones are becoming a serious problem as well. We've seen the problem with Eilat. We saw the attack on Eilat, I guess it was 3 days ago, first by a drone that came from Syria over Jordan and then landed in Eilat and arrived unannounced, shall we say. We did not detect it along the way. And that was followed by the ballistic missile attack from Yemen, which we did manage to knock down. Once again, the Chetz has proven it works. That was the first time that there's been an interception of a ballistic missile outside the atmosphere in an operational setting ever in history. So Ronald Reagan would be happy. Star Wars is here vis-a-vis the Chetz at this point. But there's a problem, of course, in terms of, the Chetz is great. It only costs a couple of $1 million every time we fire one. Maybe just $1 million, I'm not sure, but it's at least $1 million to fire one Chetz. We have David Sling, that's $1 million a piece. Luckily, the Iron Dome is down to about $10,000 a piece, so that's cheap, I guess. I don't know. But the question is, how many of these do we have? How many of these can we manufacture? How fast can we manufacture them? I have no idea what our manufacturing speed is, and I don't know what our inventory is. I would say that I'm hoping we do not get into a confrontation with Hezbollah, but if we were to get one, I would wish it would be at least a few months away when we could replenish our stocks, and also when our laser system is fully deployed. It's in experimental stage. I have a feeling we'll deploy it in this war, but I don't know how effective it is and how, it takes time. As we saw when the Iron Dome was first deployed in 2000, and I guess it was 2011, the first time it was deployed. The first times it was deployed, its rates of success were so-so. It took a number of iterations, changing the software and everything else until it became 100% or 95% effective like it is today. So first iteration of lasers, I have no idea how successful it'll be. And in any case, we don't have enough of them. Even if we have some, We don't have enough. So the possibility of a confrontation in the north is more than troubling. Anyone who says we should strike first, in my opinion, and I said this publicly a few times recently, is making a mistake, both because a first strike against the missiles of Hezbollah will be effective, but only so much so. We've seen that the Air Force alone has never succeeded in stopping the missile firing, not from Lebanon previously, and not from Gaza this time. The only reason Gaza has pretty much stopped, and by the way, this is the first day there were more rockets fired from Lebanon than there were from Gaza. The reason it stopped is because our ground troops are physically there in most cases. And the plan for Lebanon is a massive and quick assault up to northern the Beirut area of Lebanon, where the long-range missiles are located. That's not going to be easy, and I'm not sure we're ready for it, to be quite honest with you. But that's the plan. At some levels, based on what we've seen in Gaza, I think we'll get there very quickly. Our tanks these days seem to be almost impervious to any sort of attacks. We've had a few terrible cases, but basically the tanks have managed to withstand attacks from both anti-tank missiles and RGBs. But still, the cost of going into Lebanon is going to be very high. And basically, it's all reserve units that are sitting on the Lebanese border more than anything else. And the reserve units have not trained over the years as much as people would like. And they spend much of their time doing other things, which is the problem of the Army as a whole. The Army spent too much time in the last 20 years, but whatever period of time you want, going around the West Bank, Yehuda and Shomron, and defending the settlements and dealing with Palestinians and not practicing for warfare. And so that's in and of itself a problem. In Gaza itself, basically, up till now, it's been very successful. We've had losses, obviously, but way below the losses that were anticipated. Yesterday's loss of 5 men, 4 of them were killed in the same incident where they entered a booby-trapped mine shaft, a tunnel shaft, and they were all killed with the booby trap. So, of course, that brings the question, any attempt at going into the tunnels is going to be very, very costly. And that, I assume, is part of the reason we have not succeeded in rescuing the hostages, because it's probably almost impossible to get in there. So, I mean, I wake up every morning hoping to see a notification that we rescued X number of hostages. And of course, every morning I wake up and disappointed to see basically no news. But by and large, from what I understand, the northern Gaza, the Hamas resistance is pretty much broken. They're no longer operating as units. Individuals are popping up here and there. The use of overwhelming firepower has worked. And one-on-one against our soldiers that are ready, they don't do well, let's put it that way. They did very well in that initial assault, because in the initial assault, they were much more numerous, and our soldiers didn't arrive as units. They fought individually in many cases. And however good a soldier is when he's fighting alone, he's not the same as when he's fighting with his unit. But now the question is, where do you go from here? The issue of the hospitals is a big problem, obviously. We've surrounded the Shifa hospital on 3 of the 4 sides. I haven't seen any film of it, but this morning we were supposed to arrange for the evacuation of the premature babies and other babies in the hospital. What happened with that, I do not know. Obviously, the Hamas does not want us to do that. And we'll have to see where that goes. To get under the hospital is really the key. But I also think when we get there, we'll find mostly all the key commanders have already run south, and they've used what they call their railroad to go south and move to the south. The problem is, this is going to take a long time, and the world has no patience for us for a long time. The problem is, it's causing, without a doubt, a lot of Palestinian casualties, to say the least. A lot of them are fighters, and every time we hear about the thousands that are dead, some significant percentage of them are Hamas fighters who died fighting us. But some significant portion of them are women and children. And there's no getting around that, but it is what it is. and there's no way to fight a war, an urban war, without other casualties. The plans for afterwards, besides the fact that it's going to take a long time and the world is going to get more and more angry at us as time goes on, I have no doubt, is that we don't have a plan for afterwards. That's really, I think in one of my first updates before we even went in, and long before we went in, the first week or so, I wrote, who's thinking about the day after? And we can't go in without a plan for the day after. But we don't have a plan for the day after. Netanyahu was on CNN about an hour ago, and he was asked about the plan for the day after. And he, of course, said the Hamas can't rule, we have to have security rule. And then he was asked about the Palestinian Authority, which the United States is pushing. And his answer was, which is a correct answer in a sense, or he didn't answer, Zev Elkin said it afterwards, but it's correct. The Palestinian Authority is barely capable at this point of maintaining rule in the West Bank. How do we expect them to maintain rule in Gaza? Which is a good question. But then what else? What else is there? He's talking about some ephemeral other organization, a Palestinian group, Palestinian government taking control. I don't know. I don't see it. I don't know how that's going to be done. And it's certainly not going to be done without significant amount of thinking and thought and things that are not taking place in this government. There is no thought taking place at all. Netanyahu is too afraid of his right wing to, I have to, let me step back a second. Yesterday on a press conference, I saw for the first time any sign of any ability for Netanyahu to push back. When he was asked about those people in his coalition who were pushing to resettle Gaza, he said, absolutely not. It's not realistic. It's not going to happen. So that was the first time in the year and a half that I've seen Netanyahu actually push back against the far right of his government or potential government before they became a government. But beyond that, he's very afraid to talk about anything else because he's very afraid of losing support. And he knows the minute this government falls, he's out and there'll be a different government pretty quickly. So he's not willing to talk about the day after. The problem with the day after is I don't know of anybody who knows about the day after. No one in this country can realistically say what the day after should look like, because I think this country is, I don't want to use traumatized, but traumatized may be correct. This is the second time around. The first time around was the second Intifada. The second Intifada came after Ehud Barak had made his peace proposal to Arafat at Camp David, giving them 95% of the West Bank and a good part of Jerusalem. When I asked him, well, why didn't you go further? Because people were questioning that. He said, do you really think that if I went another few percentage, it would have made a difference? And then basically Clinton went further. A few months later, Clinton presented the Clinton proposal, which basically gave the Palestinians 100% of the West Bank in return for some land. In other words, it wouldn't be 100% of the West Bank, but it would be 95% of the West Bank, but they would get some land inside of what is currently Israel, so they'd end up effectively with 100%. And again, Arafat neither accepted nor came back with an alternative proposal. And then came the second Intifada with the bus bombings and the cafe bombings and everything that took place. And at that moment, basically, the Israeli left from that moment on fell apart, because the idea of giving land for peace and the idea that we could reach peace with the Palestinians suddenly became something that people had a hard time believing. Okay, now we're 20 years later. And while I wouldn't say we've gone very far in making options for the Palestinians in these last 20 years under mostly Netanyahu's governments, although we did have Sharon pulling out of Gaza, but that's a side story in a way. The reality is Israelis woke up, or in the course of October 7th, came to the realization, and not that I had really any other opinion, but came to the realization, boy, they really do hate us. There's no question that they hate us, and that it's very hard to conceive the fact that there's very little we can do that they won't hate us. And that therein lies the problem, right? In other words, everyone's talking about, well, it's just Hamas. All the Palestinians aren't Hamas. You're right. All the Palestinians aren't Hamas. And I'm quite sure that all the Palestinians wouldn't do some of the terrible things that the Hamas people did on that day. However, if we look at the story of our conflict with the Palestinians over the last 100 years, and it's been 100 years basically. I mean, you can pick the riots of 1909, no, 1909, 1920, the riots in Jaffa, or 1929 in Hebron, but wherever you want to take the point of the starting point, when Jews could not defend themselves, the results were not pretty. Maybe not as atrocious as they were on October 7th, but they were not pretty. And so that leaves us with a question, where do we go? How can we come to any sort of solution? The far right says, well, let's settle the whole land and we'll just show them and somehow they'll disappear. Obviously, that doesn't work well. There's no good way of doing it. And if I was in the Starship Enterprise, I would, move them all to some planet, a billion miles away. But that's not going to happen. So let's be realistic. So that's not an option. The left, what I was going to call the left, basically believes, and I think this is the pragmatic center at this point, because there is no real left at this point, basically believes we have to find ways of separating as much as we can from them. We can't rule them. We can't leave them in peace. We can't leave them to their own devices either. We need to find some balance and hope that the next generation somehow will grow up differently. And let's put it this way, based on the way the world is going, I'm not optimistic about that. 10, 15 years ago, I was more optimistic because the world was heading towards a more, as I used like to call it, the more Star Trek Enterprise, the Star Trek world, and not a Star Wars wars. In other words, the world generally was going towards greater integration, less nationalism, less ideology, less reliance on religion. In the last 10 years, we've seen all over the world a rise in nationalism. We've seen it in the United States. We've seen it in parts of Europe. We've seen it in different parts of the world where nationalism and identity and religion has come to the forefront of almost every discussion. And national movements have become once again important. So I fear that the general drift of the world is in the wrong direction for expecting anything to change vis-a-vis the Palestinians. And obviously we don't live, everything is affected by everything else. And today with media and everything else, social media, everything is affected by everything else. So I don't know. I am not optimistic. I wasn't optimistic before this war. Before this war, I was already, I wouldn't say I was depressed, but I was depressed on the level of saying that, okay, my life, my first political action took place when I was in 7th grade, going to Washington during the 6-Day War. And here we are, many, many years later, and we're no closer to any solution, I thought. We've made some peace with some countries, but we really no closer to any solution. Now we seem even further away from that. A couple of other notes. This is going to be a really big challenge economically for Israel. There's no getting around it. The reality of having so many people in reserves, so many people not working. The northern Galil doesn't exist at the moment. Any of these towns are completely evacuated. The areas around Gaza are also evacuated. People aren't working, people aren't producing. So all those things are going to have a tremendous impact on the economy. And the other side of it is we over the years have been constantly decreasing the percentage of our economy that goes for defense. Those days have ended, unfortunately. We were working on a smaller, and that's assuming the best, and this all ends well, and we don't end up in a war with Hezbollah, and God knows what that was resulting, because it won't be pretty. But even just finishing with the Gaza war and figuring something out with Hezbollah, which is not going to be easy, even then, the idea of a smaller, smarter army is not going to work anymore. It's quite clear we're going to need a larger army. We're going to need a much larger number of troops on any border. And that's going to impact our defense budget. It's going to impact the availability of manpower. All of those things are going to have an impact. And of course, the cost of this war is going to be very high. Just the physical cost of replacing the ammunition and the reserve duty and new tanks and all those things. They're not free and they become very expensive. So all in all, this is going to be a very big burden. The 10 years after the Yom Kippur War were considered the 10 lost years of Israel's economy. I don't know if that'll happen in this case. I think tech will mostly be able to bounce back, although I don't know. I don't know whether we'll be able to attract, I keep on putting in all the new investments in tech at the end of my update when they happen. I have a few for today, just because it's the only good news that I'm able to find is the good news of the tech investments. They're smaller than they were before, but that has nothing to do with Israel. That has to do with the fact that most of tech was overrated in terms of the values of these companies. So now that the companies are getting more normal valuations, so they're getting smaller amounts of money on their investments. But that's okay. Nothing wrong. I'm sorry, you can do quite well with $20 million. You don't need $200 million in your bank on your seed investment. So the reality is that part will be fine. But will there be enough investors out there? Will people stay? Will Israelis who can move, will they move? I don't know. It's going to be a challenge. Everyone's united now. We have to defeat our enemies and all those things, and all that's true and everything else. I'm not going anywheres, but I don't know what's going to be with the average couple and everything else in this country, especially people in tech who are totally mobile and can work anywhere in the world and can get jobs anywhere in the world. I don't know where that's going to land going forward. So that's going to be a tremendous challenge as well. The last thing I wanted to touch on, and then I'll open this up for questions, is the anti-Semitism aspect of it, and the anti-Semitism that we've seen both in the United States and around the world. It's caught me a bit by surprise, to be honest with you. I've written about it over the years, and certainly I saw anti-Semitism and saw there was anti-Semitism growing in the United States, particularly amongst the right until now. I mean, there's always some on the left, but the right was where most of the new anti-Semitism was coming from. The Jews outside, we will not replace us, the Jews outside of the tent. Even in Europe, to some extent, the far right in France, the far right in Germany, although in Germany they're more careful not to be anti-Semitic, but it's very real. But here we've had another situation where it's coming from the left. I won't even say the far left anymore, because it seems broader than just the far left. I explained a couple of times about the issue of Israel being perceived as a colonial empire, and therefore you can do anything you want against colonial empires. I'm not really sure how that explains how it jumped from Israel to Jews. I mean, yes, Jews identify with Israel to some extent, but it really has made this jump from Israel to Jews all over the world. And that has been a bit surprising. On the left side, I'm talking about. The right, I understand it comes from some place else altogether. But we're seeing it, and we're seeing a clear sense that the Jews do not seem to be safe anywhere anymore. And that's, not in any one place. It's certainly in different parts of the United States. It's certainly in Europe at the moment. And where we go from there, how that's fought, I don't know. It's truly, to me, a bit baffling how fast it's come on. Let's put it that way. I mean, it's not going to get any better, because this war is not going to get any better. The images are not going to get any better. And also keep in mind the fact that over the last 20, 30 years, there's a pretty large Palestinian population in all sorts of different parts of the world, which didn't exist 50, 60 years ago. So the Arab population of the United States is as large as the Jewish population, and some significant percentage of them are of Palestinian heritage. So that adds another level of complexity to the problem. So I guess that's half an hour. So I guess that's what I wanted to say and where we stand. I don't know what's going to happen, even tonight. It's a big question, what's going to develop in the next few hours. Hopefully quiet in the north, but I don't know. Anyway, I'll open this up for questions. There's more than a more than one. Okay, so I will try to ask to unmute. Okay, Amy. Right.
Hi there. This, of course, my question every day of the week with the hostages.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I did not bring up the hostages. You're absolutely right. Okay, so the hostages, one of the most difficult situations Israel's had to handle. And personally, I find it, just impossible. I think I've written about my encounters with hostage families, and living where I live, I'm 2 blocks away from what they call Hostage Square. Literally, it's 2 blocks from my house. I pass it on a regular basis. You can't go 20 feet. Every single street is covered with posters, pictures of the hostages. It's an impossible situation. There are all sorts of rumors of deals, and everything is being talked about and everything else. But there's a real question if any deal is doable, to be quite honest. Because the reality is Hamas believed that by their taking the hostages, they would ensure that Israel would not attack. And that was their plan more than anything else. If there was any rationality to their plan, the rationality was, we'll take hostages. Israel won't attack because they'll be worried about the hostages, and therefore we'll just have a win, and then we'll exchange the hostages for some of the prisoners, and what a great success this will be. They made one fatal mistake, which was fatal for a lot of people. If they would have just taken hostages and not killed anybody, or only killed some soldiers, that might have gotten away with that. But by killing everybody that they did, while the hostages are really important, it becomes a problem, because we can't leave Hamas in power in Gaza as we care about the hostages. That's the general feeling. And the other part of the problem, which gets complicated, is the fact that, yes, we all care about the hostages. And last night there were maybe 10,000, maybe more people turned up at the hostage square in a rally in support of the hostages and everything else. But there are probably 100,000 Israeli families who have a son, daughter, husband, wife in Gaza right now, who are more, as much as they're concerned about the hostages, they're more concerned about getting that terrible knock on the door that no one wants to get in this country. And so, as much as they care about the hostages, they care about their loved ones who are now fighting in Gaza. And no one says that, but I'll be saying quite honestly, that's a real issue. And but I don't know that we can do anymore. I mean, that's the bottom line. To Hamas, letting go of the hostages is letting go of the one card they think they have. So they're going to try to keep them as long as they possibly can. The only chance of a deal is if they actually think they're going to lose them, because somehow we're going to rescue them. And if they think they're about to lose their card, then they might negotiate a deal. But so far, it hasn't happened. And so far, despite all the talks of different possibilities, there is a sense that it may not happen. It's very unclear at this point. And it's very terrible. There's no two ways around it. It's terrible, like, more than anything else at this point, to see those faces all the time. And the families are being very effective in trying to humanize each one of them. But there's no easy solution. We're dealing with a terrorist group. So who else? Yes, asked to unmute. Okay, just unmute yourself, Michael.
There we go. First of all, thank you again for doing this. My question is about the settlers on the West Bank and the impact they're having on this situation and the drain they're causing with the need to defend them and so on.
Okay, so there's 2 parts to that question. There are 2 parts. There's the overall problem of the settlers, which is that the settlers.
No, it's with.
Wait, some people are still unmuted somehow.
Talking about this thing.
Oh, okay.
From their home.
Some people are unmuted. Whoever's talking, can they mute themselves? Thank you.
Somebody named Eileen is not muted.
Oh, sorry. I'm just going to ask my daughter how to do it. I'm not. au fait with Zoom. Sorry about
I
that.
mute you.
Okay.
I can mute you, I think. There you go. I unmuted you. Okay. Okay, so the settlers have two sets of problems. There's the ongoing problem, the fact that we had so many troops in the West Bank protecting them. There's the fact that ultimately they're not protectable. We send 8 soldiers who are not combat soldiers to a settlement to protect.
It's that button, you just press that. Hello, am I mute now? Yeah, you must be.
Okay.
You're on mute.
So we send soldiers to defend them. 8 soldiers were not combat soldiers. I guarantee you the result if someone tries to attack one of these settlers in large numbers will not be pretty. So that's number one. We don't have enough troops to protect all the different settlements in the West Bank. The second problem is, of course, let's assume that my first comment is correct. They really do hate us, okay? Let's just start with the fact that the average Palestinian hates us. But on the other hand, the average Palestinian may hate us, but may want to go on with their normal lives as much as possible, because hatred doesn't put food on your table. Hatred doesn't feed your children, doesn't educate your children. So let's assume that there's that balance, right? In other words, they may hate us, but most of them want to go on with their lives. When the settlers go on their rampages and attack Palestinians and uproot olive trees and do all the things that they do, people are going to say, well, wait a second, maybe we really can't live with these Jews because look what they're doing to us. They're pushing more, they're pushing us out. Maybe the kids decide violence is the answer. So it's not that the settlements are the cause of the overall hatred, but they clearly add to it. Let's put it that way. They're additive. They're not the root cause. The root cause is our existence here. I have no doubt that our existence is the root cause, but it doesn't help at all. And it also doesn't help militarily. Look, Ariel Sharon pulled out of Gaza for a very simple reason. We had a bunch of different settlements in the middle of Gaza. It was a tremendous drain to try to protect them. We're sending thousands of soldiers in there to try to protect them. We were losing a soldier a week, give or take, inside of Gaza, protecting these settlements or going in and out of these settlements. And he concluded that it was easier from a security standpoint to pull out of Gaza and to pull out of a couple of isolated settlements in the northern West Bank. He was right. I mean, on one part of it, I supported. I thought that, if they fire rockets once we've pulled out, then no problem. We'll just level Gaza. But the world doesn't accept that idea. So forget that. But the fact of the matter is, the settlers hurt. They don't help. And now, which brings me to the second part of this, we have some really, really, really stupid ministers. There's no way around it. We have the stupid minister who said, why don't we use an atomic bomb on Gaza? Already being, widely quoted in the Arab press and around the world. We have Dichter, who was considered the smarter of the dumb ministers. He was once the head of the Shabak, who said, this is Nakba 2023. Nakba is what the Palestinians consider the great disaster that occurred to them in 1948 when we got independence. We have others who are talking about resettling the Gaza Strip. As someone said today, one statement by one of these idiots undercuts a whole week of Hasbara by the Israeli government, which doesn't do a lot anyway. But whatever it does do is undercut immediately by a stupid statements by some of these ministers. If we had a real prime minister, he would have fired at least the one who said the atomic bomb instantly. But he couldn't do that because he was afraid of losing his majority. So that's my best of my answer to that. Anyone else?
Sure.
Mark, it's Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, speak.
What's it
Hi,
gonna
Mark.
take?
It's Barbara Jacobs.
Hi.
I will put on my video. I have a question about the settlers in the West Bank. From what I've read, they are really getting much more forward about attacking people just because they're Palestinians. And I assume this is with the blessing of the current government. Is there any hope? I mean, this can be really bad publicity. I've seen a few stories on it, but there's just no excuse for it. And is there any way they can be brought under control anytime soon?
Not with this government. I mean, it's even difficult with a regular government, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I always felt that one of our big challenges was it was going to be almost impossible to come out with a deal, to come to a solution with the Palestinians that included removal of some substantial number of settlements without close to a civil war with some of these people. These people believe in what they're doing. They also believe the land was given to them by God, and you can't walk away from what God has done. And as soon as you throw religion in, it becomes really problematic. But the reality is, it's very, very difficult. They really believe with all of their hearts in what they're doing, and they're really quite extreme. I don't know how you bring them under control, but you need to. These people have to be arrested. So the ones who are throwing rocks, all these things, you need to arrest them. You need to not, suspend their sentences, send a few of them to jail for 20 years. I don't care, 10 years from now, you can let them out, but send them to jail for 20 years and you might decrease the amount of terrible activities that they do. But it's going to be very difficult. It's a very big challenge. And this government, of course, can do nothing. This government, don't forget, the finance minister is one of them. The minister of internal or national security is one of them. So there's zero chance of this government doing anything because this government is them to a very large extent. So unfortunately, to say the least.
Thank you, and hi to Amy.
I have a question, Mark.
Go ahead.
I know you talked about the situation in the north changing. Obviously, you know that I'm here. Did you mention why Nasrallah has sort of been more aggressive in the last X amount of days? And if things do heat up, can the army actually handle an actual two-front war, or they're posturing in the media and saying, don't get involved, you don't want to start anything? Is that more just rhetoric, or can they actually handle it if need be?
Okay, so the answer is two-fold. Yes, we can handle it if need be. There's enough troops in the north. There's going to be no surprise attack. The big fear in the north before this took place was that Nasrallah would pull off what Hamas did. He has more troops than the Hamas does, and the fear was they would come across. That was the great fear. They would come across and take over the town of Shlomi or take over Kiryat Shmona, and before we could react, they would have taken the town, because these towns are literally on the border in both cases. So that was the fear before this all took place. Now it's not going to happen because we have tens of thousands of troops along the border in the north, just slightly below the border to make sure they don't get hit by anti-tank weapons. But we have tens of thousands of troops, so there can be no surprise attack at this point. There can be nothing can take place in the north right now like it took place in Gaza. The problem, of course, comes down to the missiles. That's the issue. He has a lot of missiles. He has precision missiles that theoretically can hit specific buildings or locations. We obviously have certain means of trying to deflect that electronically and in other ways. But the odds are that some are going to get through. And, I am literally 200 meters from the Air Force headquarters. So I look out if I open my window here, I would see the Air Force headquarters out my window. So that doesn't leave me with a lot of, hope for that interaction, which will come out on top of. There's no question we can handle it. There's no question that our equipment these days became so much more advanced in terms of our systems that the tanks now are pretty much can pretty much do what's needed and not be attacked. We've bought some landing ships from the United States. So the idea, I would think, would be to land north of Sidon, somewhere close to Beirut, with the significant army and cut them off by land. But again, it'll be costly. And the number of missiles that will strike the country in the meantime will not be small. Does Nasrallah really want to go to a full-scale war? I don't think so. We've all thought not, because that will be the end of the Hezbollah's rule in Lebanon. The Lebanese people are already pretty angry at the Hezbollah for what they've done and for all the issues that are relating to them. So I don't think he wants to. I think he wants to be a Lebanese party. But on the other hand, he feels sort of obligated because of the fact that we're beating Hamas. And he claims that, it's all one revolutionary group and they can easily do their part. So I don't, his speech was generally more of the same, although he did talk about the Quran and the need for, being a shaheed is a good thing, being a martyr. So I think there is a chance he's decided he's not going to start it, but he's willing to push up closer and closer to the line. And, Gallant yesterday had a press conference and he was asked, well, where's the line? And he didn't answer it. He said, you'll know they crossed the line when we start bombing Beirut. So that was his answer. And I don't think anyone knows exactly where the line is. My guess is a direct attack on Haifa would be the line. But I don't know. I'm not inside Gallant's mind. I'm not inside of the cabinet's mind, but that would be my guess. But anything up to, he's playing like up to that. In other words, the rockets that came were not his. They were theoretically Hamas's rockets, and they weren't going to Haifa. They were going to what's called the Krayot, which is, if anyone thinks of Haifa, there's the whole area when you look out from beautiful Haifa and you look up to the north, the whole arc of towns that go between Haifa and Akko. Those are the Krayot. So that's what he did. He's gone up to the line. But it's really easy. It's really easy in war to make a mistake. And that is always the fear in any which situation, is that someone is going to make a mistake. And even if both sides don't want a war, one can find oneself in a war. I mean, we're in a war in any case. We're in a low intensity war. The other part of the problem, and this becomes part of the unsolvable part of this problem, is you talk to anyone who was moved out of the north. In other words, anyone within 7 kilometers, or I think 9 kilometers, of the northern border, 7 miles or so of the northern border, has been evacuated by the government because they're too close and it's too dangerous. Well, you speak to any of them, and none of them are willing to go back unless they can be guaranteed safety. And what does that mean? First of all, it means moving Hezbollah troops away from the border. According to the UN resolution under which Israel withdrew from Lebanon, Hezbollah is supposed to stay north of the Litani River. But like most UN resolutions, I was completely violated by Hezbollah, despite the fact there's supposedly UN troops, physical troops that are in there to guarantee the agreement. But they just stand by. They're from Nepal and all sorts of places that don't really want to get into conflict with Hezbollah. So the question is there a potential political solution to get the Hezbollah to move north of the Litani? I don't know. I mean, possibly if we completely wipe out Hamas in Gaza, they might be deterred and be willing to come to some sort of agreement. But I'm not holding my breath. And this, of course, goes down to the problem that we have economically in long term, is that this is not going to be easy to bring this to a conclusion. And so, for many years I was telling people, don't give to Israel. Israel doesn't need your money. We're a rich country. I'll change that these days. We're going to be in trouble in the next 2 years, in my opinion, overall.
Mark? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
A question about the government and the ministers. If Netanyahu were to fire one or more of the problematic ministers, I don't see that there would be any kind of re-election anyway until the Hamas situation is resolved. And even if he didn't fire anybody, there's going to be a new election anyway. So it almost doesn't matter. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
Okay, so I disagree on one level. Netanyahu seems to be living in his own world, so to speak. He does not think he needs to take any responsibility for what took place. He was just interviewed on CNN, and the interviewer asked him, why do you not take responsibility for the events of October 7th? His answer was, did anyone ask FDR to take responsibility for Pearl Harbor? did anyone ask Bush to take responsibility for 9/11? That was his answer. He's living in La La Land. He does, he usually reads polls. I mean, polls basically show his support at 18 and 19%. And frankly, the latest polls show that if there were elections, Yesh Atid, Gantz's party, and Lieberman together could form a government of 64 without anybody else. But he somehow thinks that if he can get through the war and Israel's successful, he can redeem his image amongst Israelis. He is living in a different reality than I am. Now, look, it's one thing, obviously, my friends and neighbors didn't like Netanyahu before this, but I've talked to enough people in the last, the 2 or 3 weeks who all were supporting Bibi until now, and every single one of them has said he has to go. I think a whole generation of leaders has to go. That's what's, I don't know where the next generation of leaders is going to come. But back to your question, though, because it's relevant not only in terms of that answer, it's also relevant because he's a pachtan. He's afraid. He's afraid to do anything that might endanger his government. So the reality is that if he would have fired the minister of minister of Jerusalem or minister of Jewish identity. That's what this guy is, Eliyahu, minister of Jewish identity. Don't ask. I mean, I have a friend whose daughter found herself working for him. She didn't change job, but he came to be the minister. But the man is totally incompetent to be anything. But if he was to fire him, I do not think that Ben-Gvir would leave the government, because Ben-Gvir knows the numbers just as well as anybody else. And quite honestly, in the current parliament, you could easily see a situation where a new government was formed, even with the current numbers, with the rump Likud, without Netanyahu, but with some of the normal members of Likud, together with the opposition. They could form a government probably pretty quickly. And the question of where the ultra-Orthodox parties would go is an open question, but there could be an alternative government, and they see that, and they know that. And they also know that, Smotrich's party is polling around 4 seats right now. That's getting close to the number where you get wiped out completely. Ben-Gvir is doing a little better. He hasn't lost that much, but these people know they're going to be out of the government and out of power, and probably for a generation, because I think there's going to be a generation change. Now, who's going to come into power? I mean, short term, it looks like Gantz, but Gantz also has responsibility for what happened. You can't say that he has no responsibility. He was defense minister only yesterday. So it's going to require a new generation, and where that generation is going to come from is a little bit unclear at the moment. But sometimes people when the hour comes, we see who stands up, and maybe we'll find that generation.
Mark?
Yes.
So what I keep thinking about in my head is last time with Gilead, I forgot it.
Gilad Shalit.
When there was a prisoner swap, the prisoners became the heads of Hamas, and they basically took them to another level. And where do you think this stands with a prisoner swap now and the hostages? I mean, of course we want the hostages out, but we don't want to see a cycle back where the prisoners we let out become the heads of another terrorist organization, even if it's not Hamas.
It's absolutely true. It's absolutely the problem. Look, the Gilad Shalit deal was one of the worst deals that Israel ever made. The family was very effective. And if it was my son or daughter, I would do what they did. Mobilize the whole country to any price to get him out. It was a disastrous decision. Should never have happened. It created, 1,000 terrorists for one person, and he was an army person too, which makes it in some levels worse because, he wasn't a civilian. So that was a disaster. What's currently being discussed, and it's not at all clear it's going to happen, is the release of older Palestinian prisoners and women, older and young, under between 15 and 18, and older people over 55 or something like that, terrorists, and women terrorists. in return for the release of all the women and children. I think we can live with that deal. Whether we can live with a deal of all of them free for all of our hostages, very hard. I don't have the moral ability to say we shouldn't do it. I couldn't look in the face of any of these parents and say, we can't let these people go because it's bad for the country. It's very difficult. It's an impossible situation. So
Do you think they'll do it?
what?
Do you think the government would come down to making this swap?
I
The
think under
world-
the right circumstances, the government might. I just don't see it happening because I only see the Hamas agreeing to that if we also agree to a ceasefire that will turn into a permanent ceasefire. Because their whole goal in holding the hostages is to stop us from removing them from power. Now, say for the sake of argument, we move 7,000 of these people into Gaza, and there's a ceasefire for 1 week. And then 1 week later, we go in and we kill them all, or as many of them as we can. What's to stop us? What's to stop us from resuming the war immediately upon the release of all, of everybody? Once there are no hostages there, and we can be less careful of where we bomb because we won't be killing our own people. So I don't see Hamas agreeing to giving up all of the hostages under any circumstances. And I don't see us agreeing to stop under any circumstances until Hamas is removed from power. And so we're in this stuck. We don't know. There are so many reports of, Qatar's, they've stopped negotiations, they've started negotiations, they're close to an agreement, they're away from agreement. Within 1 day, it's a roller coaster here. And, and I'm one step removed, obviously, and I can't imagine what these families are going through in terms of the roller coaster. But, it's really hard. You got little kids. One of them looks like my son did it at that age. One of them looks like my grandson looks now. I mean, how do you deal with something like this? We successfully rescued the people all the way in Entebbe, and we can't rescue people who are probably at this point under some of our troops at this point. I'm sure we have tanks that are rolling over where some of these hostages are located. But they're in tunnels that are totally booby trapped, and I don't know. We have special forces; they've been trained, and I'm sure they've been planning from the first day various options of what can be done. But like I say, I wake up every morning hoping to hear some news of some successful operation, and every morning, unfortunately, we don't hear it.
I have
Yes.
another question.
Go ahead.
I have one more question.
Go ahead. One more question, and then we'll go to Michael.
Okay. So regarding the West Bank, and these are clearly Orthodox, why? I know they already don't want to go in the, they don't fight, but why can't you have them become take care of themselves, have their own, why can't they use their soul, they become soldiers and protect themselves, defend themselves?
Let's divide this into two groups. You're talking about the ultra-Orthodox, and you're talking about the settlers, which are mostly Orthodox, but not all Orthodox. Most of the regular settlers, most of them are in the army. A lot less than people make out, because a lot of them do yeshiva service. They do a short army service. They don't do as much army service as the average secular person does, even though they make a big deal of how high a percentage of them do army. As a matter of fact, Smotrich today made a very controversial comment today. He said, my people are all in the reserve duty right now. And the very fact that he talked about my people got an awful lot of criticism, and it's also partially untrue. The ultra-Orthodox, they can't defend themselves. They haven't wanted to be, and they haven't been in the army, and they're not likely. Some are going in. There's actually a story today of ultra-Orthodox women who are trying to get into the army at this point. So you have some people, this war has changed some people's thoughts. I'm sure the rabbis oppose, but some people are willing to walk away from their rabbis finally and be independent, but that's a small minority. The settlers themselves, they couldn't, there aren't a lot of them in some of these settlements. And besides which, when they do reserve duty, they're pilots, or they're tankists, or they're all sorts of things. They're not going to do guard duty as their reserve duty because we need them in whatever else they do. And they can't defend themselves. That's the reality. The only reason they can defend themselves is because the army is there, and because the Air Force is there, and because, the settlement. Now, some of the blocks are something else, like the Gush Etzion block. That's a big block, and that can be defended as a block. The city of Ariel, a little less so, but yes, and there are other couple of areas that can be defended. But the isolated settlements that have been created, especially in the last 10 years, the hilltop settlements and all those things would be really, really difficult to defend. And take a lot of...
Why should the government be sending the regular? I don't live there.
Because the government has approved it. It's not like these people did. Some of they did illegally, but the government has been in favor of it, give or take, in various periods of time. The government has supported the settlement of the West Bank to a lesser degree, to a greater degree, but it's not like these people went out there all by themselves without any support. So some of them were illegal, but a lot of them were legal. Michael.
Thank you. Looking ahead, it's one thing for Israel to go into Gaza, and as you've stated, it's going to be another thing for Israel to get out of Gaza. I'm wondering, maybe not the day after, but sometime after, whether you think, this may be far-fetched, but whether you think Marwan Barghouti might have a constructive role to play. Abbas is 88. The Palestinians have no leadership, and I think he has credibility, street cred, etc. And I don't know how crazy he is, or whether he's ever recognized Israel's right to exist. So I don't know if you could speak about that a little bit.
Okay, so Barghouti was always the hope that at some point that he would get out of prison and some sort of deal. They would talk a long time ago of a three-way deal with Pollard. Pollard would get out, then Barghouti would get out, and I forgot there was some Russian or some other spy that was going to get out. I forgot who the third part of that deal was, but that obviously didn't happen. Barghouti was considered a moderate, but he also led a good part of the Second Intifada. And he's also been in prison for the last 20 years. So what his views are today, I have no idea. No one has shown us, there has not been a Palestinian Nelson Mandela ever. And there's never been, other than some Arab Israelis who've lived here for a long time with us, who basically said, the Jews have a right to the land just like we have a right to the land. We have to separate it. And guess what? The refugees, it's a terrible thing, but the refugees all can come back to the Palestinian state. They're not going back to Israel. That's a reality. But no one is willing to make that statement. No one is willing to say end of conflict. No one is willing to come to Jerusalem and give a Sadat speech. That's the reality. Now, before October 7th, I would have said that if someone would have come to Jerusalem and given a Sadat speech, we might be able to quickly reach a peace agreement with the Palestinians. After October 7th, most Israelis would think that it was a misdirect, there was a camouflage for a planned attack of some kind or another. Israelis are very suspicious at this point. And so I don't know. Look, it's always good to be optimistic and find some solution one has in mind. I frankly don't see one. I didn't really see one before. I used to talk to, not too far from my house, every Thursday night, there were people who were demonstrating, saying, I forgot the exact name of their group, but it was basically, look at the occupation in your eyes, look what we're doing in the West Bank, etc. And I agree with them to some extent, in the sense that what we're doing in the West Bank is a mistake. It's short-sighted. We need, my view has always been, it won't solve the problem, but minimally we have to try to make their lives as easy and as good as possible. Again, it doesn't change the ideology, but it might help at the edges, to say the very least. But leave that aside. But I went to them and I asked them, okay, I have this discussion with more than one of them, and I'd say, okay, nice, I agree. It's bad what the army is doing in the West Bank, and the fact that we're killing Palestinians, and whatever else, arresting too many of them, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what would you do? What's the solution? And no one really came up with an answer. One of them literally said to me, "Well, we could turn over the whole country, toll at West Bank, to the Palestinian Authority, and we'll have peace." And I laughed the guy out of his, just laughed him in the face. I said, "If that's what you're going to try to sell the Israeli public, then you have no chance. You can argue that we should change our policies in the West Bank. They're inflicting a wound on ourselves. They're not productive. But to argue that we could turn over the West Bank to the Palestinian Authority, who can't maintain control in Jenin, back before this war." So I don't know. I don't have a solution. I mean, to be honest with you, it's always good to have a solution, and but I don't have a solution. And I think people have to realize the fact that we don't have a solution. It's not the Israeli government. I mean, yes, the Israeli government has made many mistakes over the last 20 years, and having Netanyahu in power and the Likud mostly in power for 35 years or 40 years at this point has not been good, has been bad for our relations with the Palestinians. But it doesn't mean the opposite. It doesn't mean that if we would have had a more left-leaning governments over these years, we would have had peace. I think we probably still wouldn't. Our relations might be better, but I don't think it would have bring about peace. And right now, for sure, I don't think no one could win an election in this country or even get. I don't even think they could get into parliament on a peace platform right now because nobody trusts the Palestinians right now. But the other side of it is, and I wrote this yesterday in the update, Arab Israelis have reacted surprisingly positively from our perspective to the war. They much more, the identification with Israel has gone way up. It may have something to do with the fact that Hamas killed Arabs as easily as they killed Jews, even though they knew they were Arabs. So they realized, well, if they're going to kill us too, then maybe we just got to be like the Druze and identify fully with the state. So I think that's a positive. But, it took a lot of years. I would say it's not until the last 10 or 15 years that we've seen Arab Israelis being fully integrated in the economy the way they are, where, in Tel Aviv University, they're close to 50% of the students, and also in Haifa University, and they're 70% of the pharmacists in this country. They're a significant portion of the doctors. They're at least 20%, which is their population. They're more than 20% of the nurses. And there's a significant number of them in high tech also. I mean, they don't have the advantage of going into the army and coming out of some of the elite units, but they've started high tech companies and they've been successful. And the vice president worldwide of Apple, who's in charge of their chips, is an Arab Israeli who studied in the Technion. So there've been a lot of progress there, but that took 2-3 generations. And 2 or 3 generations, it was until the 60s that we moved military rule from the Arab areas of Israel. We had direct military rule until the 60s. I think 1960, I think was the date, but I'm not totally sure. But so it's taken, another 60 years. We've succeeded in over 60 years. And yes, the Arab Israelis are by and large integrated and they consider themselves Israelis. So that's something. But I don't know what we do in terms of the Palestinians. I truly don't. Anybody else?
Mark,
Yes.
if the Palestinian Authority is corrupt and Hamas is corrupt, then who do you negotiate with? And the corollary is, how do you grow from the citizenry, people with whom you can both negotiate with, and who will tell their own people that they are in charge and the solutions they've created are valid?
Okay. Therein lies, if I had that answer, I'd say I have an answer. My best guess, and this is just a best guess and a best hope, that if we're successful in Gaza and totally defeating Hamas, then the idea of Hamas will not go away, but people may be dissuaded from the fact that this is not the solution, it's not the way to go. And they might be convinced, more of them, to find an alternative means of ending this conflict. Maybe we originally, before we let the PLO back in the Oslo agreements, there were mayors of Arab towns. despite the fact that some of the Israeli right assassinated some of them. We'll leave that part aside. But they were mayors of towns in the West Bank. Maybe, and this is really, I'm saying this out there, maybe if you can develop municipal leaders and then somehow transform that into something more across the board, maybe you have a chance. But this is not something to be done in a day. And this is something that requires a lot of effort and a lot of thinking, none of which is being done here. You know, Israel's always been bad at planning. It's worse when it comes to things like this that are politically problematic. I mean, maybe there's a think tank in some university who has ideas and plans, but I can tell you with 100% certainty, the government is not doing the planning necessary, and it doesn't even have the people who possibly are capable of doing that planning right now. But that's the only thing that I could think of that might have some chance. And I say some chance because I don't know that it really succeeds. Because again, this conflict is not about land. I once thought it was about land, but it's not about land. It's about our existence here. And look, in 1947, the UN came up with a partition plan. The Arabs didn't oppose it because they wanted a change in the borders. Or they didn't come back and say, you know what, we'll accept this partition plan, but we want these 10 villages to be part of the Palestinian state and not part of the Israeli state, or some version therein. There was no alternative presented. And that has been the story all along. There was no alternative presented when Barak made his peace plan. There was no alternative presented when Clinton made his peace plan. There was no alternative presented when Ehud Olmert presented his peace plan. You know, all they had to do was accept Ehud Olmert, even though he was going out of power and they may have had to face Netanyahu afterwards. But all they had to do was accept the peace plan, and at least they would have had the moral high ground. You know, when Trump came up with his peace plan, I had some interactions with people in the Palestinian Authority because I was on TV with some of them, and I said to them, accept it, accept the plan, and say we accept it and we want, you know, a couple of changes. Don't say no. Nope. They said no, and they gave Israel the high ground because they said no fast and quickly. They said no because anything that hints of end of conflict seems impossible for them to do. And that's the sad part of all of this, more than anything else.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, it's Jack Lowenstein here, calling from New York, but really from Australia. Is there any prospect of Egyptians coming to some sort of condominium approach to solving the Gaza afterward situation?
So Israel would like that, but the Egyptians certainly don't want that. The Egyptians had the option of getting back Gaza from Begin in the peace agreement with Egypt. They didn't want Gaza because Gaza is trouble, and Hamas is aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, which has been their nemesis for the last 10 years. They are aligned with the terrorists operating in Sinai, where the Egyptians have been fighting on and off for the last also 10 years. So the Egyptians are not looking to try to gain additional Palestinian residents in any which way. And so the Egyptians really don't want this. I mean, they basically made it clear to Israel that it would endanger Israel's relationship with Egypt if Israel tries to pursue this much more. Look, you might be able to get the Egyptians to agree to some sort of temporary solution, which would be to, you know, temporarily a refugee camp partly on the Egyptian side of the border, hospitals on the Egyptian side of the border, but they would only do it based on our absolute promise that the Palestinians could move back to Gaza once the war was over. And they're afraid of doing even that much. Look, remember...
That wasn't quite my question. My question was for a post-conflict, a post-war period in Gaza, for some kind of international led technocratic government, including the Egyptians, perhaps even the Saudis.
Okay, you could see a technocratic government being put in place. What I don't see happening is unless we defeat every single Hamas fighter, I don't see any of these forces or groups willing to take a chance of being killed while doing it. So if they can be guaranteed peace and peace, not prosperity, peace in Gaza in the meantime, I could see a situation where you could have a technocratic Arab government of some kind, Saudis, Egyptians, all the countries that we have some sort of relationship with, being some sort of a protectorate in the meantime. That is a possibility. It's probably one of the more likely possibilities. I don't know how long that lasts, and I don't know how that, what sort of transition that brings to Palestinian control. But it's a real possibility because there aren't too many other possibilities, to be honest.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go now, but thank you so much for including me in this talk.
My pleasure. Anyone else?
Take one shot.
Yeah.
Go on. Other people.
Rick?
Yeah, first of all, Mark, thank you for the reporting that you do on all this from your place there in Israel. It's very much appreciated to have your voice. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you're fine. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, my question is from your perspective and your point of view right now, what is the role, if any, that would be progressive, in international diplomacy?
You want to restate that? What do you mean by progressive in international diplomacy? Explain what you mean.
Sorry?
Explain what you mean a little more by what do you mean by progressive in international diplomacy?
Well, I mean, just roles that other countries in the world, including, of course, the United States, which is already playing some role, obviously. But what is the possibility in your perspective, in that, to help resolve the situation, in a way that would actually also work for Israel, certainly, but also for others as well? Is it really too late for that now, or what are the possibilities?
I don't know. Look, over the last 20 years, the international community has given a lot of money to Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
An overwhelming percentage of it ended up in tunnels, and in arms and in rockets and in all those related things. I don't know. I don't know what role, again, if for instance, as an international technocratic government, obviously the international community could support that, and that would be good. And so I think that's important. But I don't know. Again, we have this problem. And I mean, I don't know how to describe it. I considered myself a progressive. I consider myself on the liberal side and on the left side of Israeli politics. But we tend so often to transport our own values onto other people. And we think that if other people want the same things that we want, and I just fear that that's just not the case. And it's so easy. We want it so badly. We want peace so badly. We don't want to hate these people. We don't want, it's like, so we transmit it. We want that progressive view. We think there's a solution to every problem. Especially Americans always think there's a solution to every problem, and we don't like no solution. But I don't know that there is. I just don't know that there's a solution. I would hope. Look, I've given up for a solution in my lifetime, to be quite honest. I mean, I'm the same age as many of you on this call. A lot of you are friends, and some of you obviously are not. But I'm not even sure that I can hope that my children's generation, I'm hoping that my grandchildren's generation might reach some sort of a peace or some sort of change. But I don't know. This has been going on a long time. I think I've told this story before, but when I was in the army in 75, 76, I met this other soldier whose father fought in the War of Independence. And I spoke to him and I walked away from that conversation. And I said to myself, I need to make sure that I can look at my children's eyes and know that we've done all we can to reach peace before they go into the army. Well, they've all been through that period of time. I'm not sure we always did all we can, but we did a fair amount. Rabin did a fair amount. Barak did a fair amount. We never did all we can, but I don't know that if we did any more. It goes back to what I said before when I spoke to Barak and I presented the question that people asked: if he only had been a little bit more generous, Arafat might have agreed. And his answer was, he almost laughed at me. He said, "Do you really think that if I went from 95 to 97% of the West Bank, he was going to agree to permanent peace with Israel, he was right. It really didn't make any difference at that point. That wasn't the issue. It wasn't how much land we were giving them. So, I don't know. I wish I had a better answer. We all want better answers. We all want to be able to find a solution. Right now, all I can do is report on the solution, on the situation. I wish there was something active I could do to improve the situation, but unfortunately, right now, the best thing we can do is win this war with the lowest casualties and see where we go after that. I've been told to Theo.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Mark. I've had this question for the whole conversation, but you just made me more scared than I was, because you said something I've really never heard you say, which is essentially, who are these people? We have no common ground with them, it seems. And how can we talk to them because they don't have the same values that we have? And I know that traditionally we've always sort of separated the leadership from the Palestinian people, from Gazans. And so my question is this, and it applies both to American Zionists and also to what's happening in Israel, about which I have no sense on this topic. What is the level of friendly dissent? What is the level of, we support this war, but perhaps there should be a ceasefire? But we as Jews find this level of murder intolerable. And I don't know whether there's, I mean, I'm sure there's that voice in Israel, but I don't see it in the American press. I don't see it in the Israeli press. And certainly in this country, when people do try to say, I'm a Jew, I'm a progressive, I'm a Zionist, but these videos are, you know, in some ways intolerable. We have to live with the intolerable at the same time as the necessary. Most Jews agree with Israel that we have to completely crush Hamas, but is it really at all costs? And anybody who says something like that is completely crushed in this country. Not to mention anybody who says I'm a Zionist and anything else is completely crushed, because I think you understand the level of anti-Semitism we're experiencing.
Okay. There's a little bit of dissent. There is maybe 50 people demonstrating every day, or at least on Saturday night, opposite defense ministry, saying to end the war. I don't know how to answer that question. No, I really don't, because the answer is, look, to most Israelis, Hamas has become Nazis. And effectively their actions on that day were Nazi-like or worse than Nazis in some ways. And what scared everybody more than anything else was that famous phone call where the terrorist called his parents and told them how he's killed some Jews today. And the parents were great, basically. You know, my son, you're wonderful, etc., that you killed some Jews. Now, does that represent every Palestinian? I'm sure it doesn't. But what percentage, when we say leadership, it's always the leadership. It's not the Palestinian people. And maybe that's the case. And maybe, you know, in a couple of generations, it won't be the case. And maybe, but look, we have all the Palestinians who've left in the diaspora, right? And they've turned into anti-Semites, basically. So those that have left and are living better lives, that hasn't changed their views. They've turned into anti-Semites and blame the Jews for everything. A lot of these groups that are attacking Jews are Palestinians in their leadership or egging them on. Do we not see them as individuals? Look, I clearly see Arab Israelis who I know, and some of them I know fairly well. And I'm going to say some of my closest friends are Arab Israelis, but I've worked with them and worked with them closely for a couple of years here and there, and both on various levels. And I think I understand them to a very large extent. But again, the Arab Israelis are a different story. They've accepted our existence, most of them, and they've identified more as Israelis than anything else because they've lived the positive aspects of the semi-liberal democracy that we have. You know, you speak to any gay Arab Israeli, he's not going to be supportive of Hamas. I mean, the most bizarre thing in the world is seeing, you know, LGBTQs for Palestine. I mean, please, or for Hamas, worse. You know, any one of them would come to Gaza, they'd be hung basically instantly. But okay, it's another progressive organization. Look, I've been shaken as much as everybody else. I mean, over the years, my last election, I voted for Meretz, not so much because I believed in Meretz, because I thought they did a terrible job, but I was trying to, I waited very, very late in the day, and I had the feeling they might not pass the percentage, and I knew that was going to be really bad for the whole block, and I thought maybe my vote would work. It wasn't enough, obviously, it was a wasted vote, but leave that part aside. So I've been on the left of the spectrum, not the far left, because I've always had this question: will the Palestinians ever be willing to reach peace, to make peace with us? But we are at a period of great uncertainty, and a lot of people are asking a lot of questions with no simple answers. I certainly don't have any simple answers. I don't know. I know that, you know, I'm here and I'm here for the rest of my life, but I don't know what the future is going to lie. On the other hand, we look at the world out there, and my goodness, the amount of anti-Semitism is hard to fathom. So I'd rather be here, where at least I have an army to fight for me, than be where you are, where you're relying on the local police, however good or bad they may be at any given moment. So, look, it's a real challenge. Life has become a real challenge. You know, can you separate out day to day to national existence? It's hard, especially right now. We all try. You know,
Mark? Mark, can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know if you saw the Yossi Klein Halevi podcast in the New York Times, but one of the things he pointed out is that he said the typical Palestinian, not the leadership, just the man in the street, does not believe Jewish history, thinks that our history is a myth, that we have no ties to the land, etc. And to the extent that that persists, it's very easy for them to see that any land, any Jewish state in the region is stolen from them. So to change that view that they have, obviously it's going to take a long time, but it seems like it's at least starting at the some level, the children, whatever, to try and do that, because as long as they persist in that belief that our whole history is a myth, then any Jewish state is treif in their view.
Absolutely correct, and I think that's one of the reasons the Arab Israelis don't have the same view. You know, they've been in the Israeli education system, and they're taught differently. They may not believe everything they're taught, but generally that they're taught differently. They're taught a different history. And so they understand our history and our connection to the land. And I think that's part of the reason we have a different relationship with the Arab Israelis than we do with the Palestinians. But okay, so for generations now, the Palestinians living whether as refugees or in the West Bank or Gaza have been taught that we have no connection to the land, we're usurpers, and all the other things that the left in the United States thinks. Right? We have college professors who believe that. So how are we going to affect Palestinians when people who have PhDs in political science on American universities believe that we have no connection to the land and we're just colonizers? I don't know, but you're right. Yes, education is always the key, but how do you educate? And how do you educate and generate? You know, how can you connect? How can you disconnect? Let's assume we took control of all the schools for the sake of argument, right? But what are they going to learn at home? They're going to learn the same stories. They're going to learn the same. They're going to be given the same key that 6 generations ago, their refugees, parents, great-grandparents, great-great-great-great-grandparents left, and they need to return to this village that doesn't exist anymore. There are no other refugees in the world that exist 6 generations down. And refugees move to new lands. They end up being ethnic minorities, and then they integrate and they intermarry, and they become part of whatever country that they move to. You know, after World War II, there were 50 million refugees in Europe. They all integrated and they became part of the countries that they were. And we don't see too many, there's little problems here and there, but by and large, they all integrated wherever they moved to. But the Palestinians are a different story. So But it doesn't help to be right. That's the problem. That's the frustration. I can give all the arguments I want of why we're right. Number one, in this day and age where no one believes facts, it's impossible to change anyone's minds, right? You present people with a series of facts and they're going to say, oh, where do you know that fact? So it's not true. It's almost impossible. Today, there is no such thing as a fact. So that's problem number one. And problem number two, it's nice to be right, but it doesn't help ultimately because we can't convince people of anything. Okay, I'm being told by Gail, go ahead.
I just I have a quick question, which is on a different topic, which is the world media and how things get presented quite differently between the Israeli media and the world media, and how this is influenced the level of violence and anti-Semitism. If you could just address that,
Sure. I mean, it's okay. So there are two levels to that. One level is the fact that the media moves on to the next story very quickly. So yes, what started this on October 7th was covered in the world media fairly well for the first couple of days. But now all the scenes are coming out of Gaza and all the pictures are coming out of Gaza, and the pictures of Gaza are not pretty. Now, of course, all the people, remember something else, this is one of I wrote about this, the story of the people working for all these organizations in Gaza. Every single one of them work for Hamas. So every reporter that's reporting in from Gaza all work for Hamas. They're members of Hamas, and they also happen to be a stringer for the New York Times, for BBC, for wherever it's going to be. So that is a problem, and that helps contextualize a lot of their reporting. Even beyond the ones in Gaza, I mean, I don't know all of them, but I know in two cases, the BBC reporter who's based here and the NPR reporter. I don't know exactly what their ethnic backgrounds are, but they're both sort of Arab descent of some kind or another with Arab names. So that probably doesn't help to any extent. And again, the media doesn't like complex stories. That's the other problem. Our story is a complex story, and
how about the numbers? The numbers of
so problem number one is they accept the numbers, whatever is given to them by Hamas, right? So I was most disturbed when I wrote about this on a completely side tangent when I was listening to a podcast on the impact of the political impact within the Democratic Party of Biden's support of Israel, and the person being interviewed, who happened to be Jewish, just on the side said, around the 5,000 children that Israel has killed. Where in the world did he see that we killed 5,000 children? Right? In other words, I am sure we've killed some children. And it's terrible that we killed some children. There's no question it's bad. Children die. They don't deserve to die. And go through all those things. But 5,000 children? Where in the world did that number come from? I guarantee we didn't kill 5,000 children. But Hamas issued a press release that said Israel has killed 5,000 children. So that becomes a narrative, because we can't say how many children we actually killed. We don't know exact numbers. No one knows the exact numbers. No one's counting the numbers in the morgue. And no one's counting, they're calling a 17-year-old member of Hamas fighting a child also. Obviously, it's too bad that a 17-year-old is fighting, but he's fighting with a gun and he's a fair target. So, but therein lies the problem. It's easy to take the numbers, take those numbers, repeat them again and again and again. And of course, the old story, a lie, just repeat it enough times and it becomes a fact. And so those numbers keep on being repeated. And we end up with where we end up. Those are the facts.
Do you have any sense for what the more realistic numbers might be?
I don't really know. It would not be fair for me to say, and I don't really think it's even all that relevant in a way, because look, it's bad. There are civilians being killed. But on the other hand, there is no way to fight an urban warfare where your enemy has by nature put himself within civilians to have a situation where civilians aren't going to get killed. That is the reality. That's our reality. Now, and there's no way to fight an urban warfare without that. And so it's terrible. So, but what's the choice? Not fighting the urban warfare, letting Hamas maintain its rule of Gaza? What are the choices? They're terrible choices, but there are no good choices. I mean, what Israel's trying to do is getting as many of them as they can to move south. And they've managed now to get, from what the best guesses are, all but 25 or 30,000 now to move from northern Gaza to southern Gaza, so that there won't be civilians who can die as they finish cleaning up northern Gaza. But then what happens? We have to deal with southern Gaza too at some point. So, excuse me. I don't have the numbers. I don't think we'll ever know the numbers, because we'll never really know what the exact numbers are. But don't, so it's less. It's still bad. It's still bad. It doesn't make a difference how you look at it. Killing civilians is a bad thing, but then there is no choice. And by the way, it's not illegal. That's the other thing. It's not genocide. The genocide against the Palestinian people. Well, the simple fact about genocide against the Palestinian people is the Palestinian, there were 650,000 Palestinian refugees, give or take 20,000 in 1948. Now they're 5 million or 6 million. So if we were doing genocide, that would not be the numbers, to say the least. But it's bad. There's no way to say that it's good.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, so I have children who are college age and well, slightly older, and their impressions are just, I wish I could say something that would.
Well, I guess the answer to some of these people, and the answer is, what do you suggest? What do you suggest? Give me an alternative. Give me an alternative. What do you suggest? It's terrible that children are dying, that people are dying, that civilians are dying. Please tell me what you suggest. Do you think it's okay that after Hamas did what it did, to allow them to remain in power in Gaza? If they say yes, then there's not. What are you going to say? I don't know. But if they say no, then what's the solution? Do we have space lasers? Who was it? Green, that crazy congresswoman said, the Jews have space lasers. Well, maybe if we had space lasers, we could just kill all the Hamas people surgically. But we don't have space lasers, so we can forget about that. So that's the question I would ask. Push it to them. Always, what do you suggest? What do you suggest? How do we do this? What is a better way of doing this? I wish there was, but that doesn't. Their answer will probably be, well, it's not my responsibility to come with a better answer. They just shouldn't kill people, kill civilians. Well, okay. I mean, there's no good solution to that.
That's what Bernie Sanders said on CNN when he went off on Israel. The anchor asked him, well, what would you propose? And he goes, that's a question for military experts, of which I am not.
Yeah, okay. That's great.
Bernie.
There has been no such thing as urban warfare without killing civilians in a populated area. So, yeah, I mean, it's bad. It's bad pictures. It's bad. People shouldn't die who are just civilians. But I would assume that a large percentage of the deaths that they're talking about. Don't forget, we killed about 1,500 of them, just the ones who crossed the border. So if they're talking about a death toll of 10,000, and start with the fact that take 1,500 of that were the ones who crossed the border and we killed. And I would have to assume we've killed a few thousand, if not more, Hamas fighters in the course of our both bombing and, of course, in the military campaign. But again, okay, you're going to end up with maybe 6,000 fighters and 4,000 civilians. I mean, by international law, that'd be a very good ratio. Doesn't make it any easier, the fact that we've killed 4,000 more or less innocents. But there's no good answer that I know of.
Mark?
Yes,
Mark.
Is there a plan for after fighting in the north, what they're going to do with these refugees they've all pushed to the south?
Well, the plan is to come up with some sort of solution that, again, to find some way of getting the Hezbollah to move north of Litani. That would be the goal.
No, I'm sorry, in Gaza. In Gaza, I mean.
Oh, in Gaza. Okay, so in Gaza, again, the hope is that if we've removed Hamas from power in Gaza, the people can move back to the area around the Gaza Strip and rebuild their communities. That's the hope. I mean, they've all made it clear that they're not planning to build a community if they have to have a safe room in their apartment or house. They want a different situation in Gaza, and if there is, they'll move back. That's the goal.
Today I heard that they said that by Shifa Hospital, underneath, most of Hamas had left. They're gone. They went to the south underneath. So, okay, so now we've got them, you have them down there. So, I mean,
This
it almost-
this will not end quickly. This will not end. We will have to deal with the South as well. We can't just deal with the North. We'll have to deal with the South, but you can deal with one part at a time, and you clear up one part, then you move to the South, and the international community is going to be going crazy over the next 2 months. That's the reality, because this is not going to get any better. I mean, right now, I don't think we're killing very many civilians, because we're in an area where there are very few civilians left, but still civilians are dying. There's no question. They're using them as human shields. We killed one of their Hamas people who was holding 1,000 Gazans as hostages as human shields, but it won't end easily. It won't end easily. There's no easy ending. Jack, you were trying to speak.
Thank you, Mark, for this presentation. During World War II, American Jews were felt to be quiet and were not active enough in trying to intercede. I think that most Jews in the United States are very much in support of Israel. Now, there's going to be a big rally in Washington, D.C. at the National Mall on Tuesday, November 14th. And actually, one of the leaders in terms of getting people down there, we have 12 buses from Westchester go to the rally. What I'm asking is, what can American Jews do in terms of helping Israel? Also, how do Israelis feel U.S. American Jews are in terms of the support, looking for support in this war?
Okay, so I'll say 3 levels. One, they continue on the political level. I was not one of the great supporters of AIPAC and recently over the last couple of years, but right now we need AIPAC on steroids. To try do the best to keep Congress supporting us as much as possible. So that's number one, the political side. And again, I assume the rally in Washington is partially there to do that also, to show the support. And I'm hoping it's it beats the Soviet Jewry rally that took place I guess in the 1990s. I guess it was this very large Soviet Jewry rally that took place. The last big huge Jewish rally was for Soviet Jewry in Washington. So hopefully this will be the biggest rally in Jewish American history. So that will be good in and of itself. Number 2, I said before, again, I was not one, again, for the last 20 years or so, I've been saying, don't give money to Israel. It doesn't need the money. We're a rich country. Now that won't be the case so much. And so you rethink your priorities in terms of where you're giving your money. Again, make sure it doesn't get wasted, find the right places and all those things. But Israel's going to need a lot of help going forward, in my opinion, at this point. 3, if you're younger, come and volunteer at this point. There's a tremendous shortage. After the Yom Kippur War, I started an organization called Student Mobilization for Israel. And one of the things we did, there were about 80 of us who made Aliyah afterwards and went into the army, but we had a sign up of 5,000 people who were going to come to Israel to volunteer, not volunteer in the army, but volunteer what Israel needs right now, which is we don't have people picking fruits and vegetables. The Thai workers mostly left because a lot of them were kidnapped, and the farmhands that are coming from the Palestinians are not allowed in. So there's a great shortage on all of Israeli farms of people. So if you're young and you're the age that you can come volunteer to work on the farms and other places, because we need the personnel today. It seems like we're back to pre-67 times. It's very strange in that way, even though we're a much larger country today. Those are the 3 levels. Look, Israel likes hearing good news, and good news generally is hearing support from American Jewry. But to be quite honest, you need to deal with the issue of the anti-Semitism that exists in America. You need to figure out what to do on the college campuses. I don't know how you address it. It's embedded deep. This colonial theory and revolutionary theory is being taught in most of the elite colleges, and like I mentioned, in one of my newsletters. It's a required course at Columbia College at this point. It's a required reading, excuse me, and part of the required courses. You need to figure this out and not okay. It's really nice that ADL and all these things respond to anti-Semitic incidents, but I think someone needs to be doing a more deep dive into trying to figure out what's the underlying cause? Is there a way of addressing those causes? I don't know there is, but someone needs to do that deep dive and to see what can be done to address those problems as an underlying basis. If there isn't a way of dealing with the underlying basis, then take your line and move here. I mean, but if you're planning to stay and your family is planning to stay in America for the next couple of generations, then you better find what is the underlying cause and how to address the growing anti-Semitism, and not incident by incident. You need to take a look at what ties all these incidents together and what can be done to address that problem, and not in a week, over 3 years, over 5 years. What sort of plan can be put in place? And I don't know whether it'll be successful or not, but if you're planning to make America your home for you and your future generations, then you need to find ways of addressing that. Otherwise, the only solution is to come here.
Mhm.
Well, I can tell you, Mark, both of my kids, Sarah has one opinion, and it has to do with her Jewish upbringing and being in NIFTY, which was the youth organization, and how they taught them. And Alex was very anti-Netanyahu, and I think you could speak with him about it. He has his theory, and they're younger, and I think they're relevant because they're the next generation, and they both have different ideas. And I guess I couldn't say it as well as they can, but I think you should probably speak to them, because actually Sarah went for an interview at the ADL last week. She's talking to the ADL, but I really think that you should speak to both of them, since you know them.
Okay.
They both have opinions about what's going on with their friends and the people that they grew up with that were taught one way, and now they're going the other way. And I don't know, Alex thinks it has to do with the left wing in the Democratic Party, which he is one of, but he is so pro-Israel. And I think he feels that I don't know. I think you should talk to Alex. He has his opinion, and I think it's relevant. And Sarah has her opinion, and I think hers is relevant.
Okay.
And I can't, sorry.
No problem. One last question. I think we've been on for a while. Do you have any last questions? Speak up if you have a last question. Okay. No other questions. I will thank you all for participating. I will plan to do this again in 2 weeks. Maybe there'll be good news in 2 weeks. I don't know. But my plan is to do this once every 2 weeks. So I will, send out the information again, probably the same time as this time in 2 weeks. If there's a need in between, if things change radically, I'll do something in between. But otherwise, in 2 weeks, and of course, I'll continue sending up the updates 6 days a week. So thank you all for participating. And may I have only good news coming forward. I hope so. I'm not positive, but
Amen.